Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking that they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. They were just two kids who met at North Central Bible College in Minneapolis and figured that they would spread the gospel. She was born poor in a family of 8 children, all crammed into a 3-bedroom house in Minnesota that did not have the benefit of indoor plumbing. She figured anyone who owned a dishwasher was rich. His family had one. That impressed her, but it wasn't the dishwasher that swayed her into saying yes to his proposal after just 3 dates. It was his strong faith and his belief in himself that did it. If anyone had suggested she simply wanted out of the life she was living, no one said. They were both theatrical, one might even say overly dramatic, and both had been raised Pentecostal, or as folks derisively called them back when the pair were growing up, holy rollers, as the believers in this highly excitable version of Christianity were known to be the most evangelical of evangelicals before that was even a thing. Pentecostals became spirited while in prayer, often speaking in tongues and gesticulating wildly as filled they were, as they say, with the Holy Spirit. I'm guessing that belief and desire to be touched by the Lord you worship makes you a fervent kind of zealot, and that they both were. At their peak, from the mid-1970s to the late 1980s, Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker were histrionic buffoons to some, but they were also among the most blessed of humans to others. How you viewed them depended on if you bought what they were selling, and make no mistake, they were indeed selling. Eternal salvation, that is, and the oddly 20th century notion that because God wanted you to be happy, he was going to make you rich, too. Their God, they said, was hell-bent on passing along monetary dividends if only you believed hard enough, and if you saw fit to part with some of your cash and send it their way. That may not be exactly how Jim and Tammy Faye put it, but that is what it was in the end when the feds in the form of the Federal Communications Commission and the Internal Revenue Service finally did some probing. Jim didn't help his cause much because he, as they say in church, had also transgressed with another woman while married to Tammy Faye, and that's not good if you're the head of a televangelical network and your wife is by your side daily, praying and weeping and having her mascara run as if it's being chased to make her point. What happened to Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker in the end, they did to themselves. Many across the world would say they deserved it. What they did that got the feds' attention, finally, was taking money designed for one purpose and using it for another. And though this is tough to prove, surely they knew some of the people who provided that money hadn't really been able to afford to share their meager means. Equally troublesome was the Bakkers' inherent claim that giving them money would help donors save their own souls. As I understand the religion they were professing and sharing and selling, saving your soul doesn't work that way. No matter. The preaching pair would steadfastly claim innocence, even guilelessness, even in the end, when it had all come apart. Here's Jim speaking in the third person, as only totally normal people tend to do.
The people that stole PTL, literally, a con game was perpetrated to Jim and Tammy. These people wouldn't even allow me to go back to clean my own desk out. And so, it's a strange thing to be cut off from something you built.
We've been like people without a country since this has happened.
In 1990, Jim Bakker would be convicted of common law fraud in the amount of $158 million. Tammy Faye, probably ignorant of her husband's doings, was not held liable for any of it, though many wondered out loud how she could live like she had more money than God and not suspect that somebody was being fleeced. She would indeed bear the shame of their downfall as much as he did. How did they go from the idealistic pair on the road where he'd preach and she would sing and play the accordion to being a felon and his cheated-on mole? Technically, Jim would be found guilty of 8 counts of mail fraud, 15 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy. Technically, he was found guilty of defrauding a whole arc of people because he vastly oversold the number of vacations at his grandiose Heritage USA theme park / religious awareness sideshow. That is, he could not live up to his promises of a yearly godly vacation at a place that didn't exist, but for which they believed they had already paid. The money people sent in, ostensibly to help build a hotel or a theme park or missions overseas, had gone to prop up the whole Christian network and fanciful enterprise Bakker ran. The downfall of Jim and Tammy Faye made news worldwide when it broke and shook the faith of who knows how many God-fearing people. The downfall stayed in the news for a decade, more or less, because the number defrauded was likely in the tens of thousands across this wide land and in at least a dozen other countries. Whoever they were, they never recovered their money. And while their faith may have led them to forgive, they were undoubtedly victims of a prophet selling something that, in any case, is not something you can buy. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Hiya Health Products. We just got a new batch of Hiya Health's vitamins this week, actually. Getting food into my 10-year-old kiddo is one of our biggest friction points. I try to make healthy food. He doesn't eat it. I agree to feed him garbage, and he doesn't eat that either. So, Hiya Health's vitamins are my saving grace. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full-body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. Formulated with the help of nutritional experts for kids 2 and up, Hiya is pressed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies and then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more. And to make things easier, Hiya is sent straight to your door so we parents have one less thing to worry about. Plus, I also recommend checking out their new kids probiotic and nighttime essentials. We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/COTC. This deal is not available on the regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/COTC and get your kids the full-body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker started out as itinerants, traveling the country by car, preaching and praying and promising spiritual and physical healing to all who showed up at their church circuit in North Carolina. It paid badly. Once they were paid in chickens that Tammy Faye made into pets, but they seemed happy. In the early 1960s, Pat Robertson, the Southern Baptist minister who pioneered religious broadcasting post-war, heard about the Bakkers, who had made an impression in the Upper South. He urged them to come help him build an audience with a kids show on his Christian broadcast network, also known as CBN. At the time, viewership for his network wasn't much, less than 5,000 tuning in on a regular basis. Television was just entering the modern era after the first TV satellite had launched in 1962. Color TV was in its infancy, and shows like Get Smart and I Dream of Jeannie debuted. ABC's nightly news broadcast was still only 15 minutes long, with CBS and NBC having just expanded to a half hour. But Robertson dreamed big and picked well with the Bakkers, whose kid-friendly puppet show was a smash hit. They pretty much winged it on a daily basis, doing skits with puppets and Tammy Faye handing out household hints that centered on the thrift she had known growing up. Soon, the Bakkers were getting 5,000 letters a week, and their audience was growing. Ellen Bakker, no relation and one fewer K in her name, worked with a couple as the PTL video librarian and tried to explain their appeal.
You feel like they're one of you, and you feel like you're sitting there with them and they're talking to you. And they talk about everyday things and they're not just preaching down to you.
Jim Bakker was given the hosting job of the annual CBN telethon that had only made $40,000 in 1964. Their goal was $120,000, explained John Wigger in his book, PTL, The Rise and Fall of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker's Evangelical Empire. A good $40,000 away from the goal on the telethon's last day, Jim became overwrought. Robert Manzano, a one-time PTL vice president, recounted what happened.
One time the telethon wasn't doing terribly well, and so Jim started crying and started saying that if people didn't send in $10 or something like that, that they wouldn't be able to survive, and the phone started ringing, people started sending money.
He wept, sobbed, begged, telling viewers that the duty to spread the word was their responsibility. He then decided to take prayer requests, and the telethon that was almost over became the telethon that wouldn't end as calls kept coming, and by golly, Jim Bakker and his hard sell had saved the network. Wigger wrote the telethon, quote, raised enough money to pay off all the station's debts and fund operations for the coming year, end quote. Jim and Tammy Faye were rewarded by being offered the Christian Network's version of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. Late-night prayer, chats, guests, fun, and a live band, all the playground for whatever Jim and Tammy Faye could summon. Called the 700 Club, it would run for 18 seasons through the end of 2009. Jim and Tammy Faye left in 1972, claiming Robertson was veering too far off the mission, given that CBN was now showing reruns of old, albeit wholesome, TV shows like The Dick Van Dyke Show and Gilligan's Island. The Bakkers became vagabond televangelists going to Orange County, California to help friends Paul and Jan Crouch with their tiny fledgling little Christian network, the Trinity Broadcast Network, which was really no more than salvaged materials and a home stereo audio console and a remote truck loaned to them by an Anaheim church. With the help of a similarly vagabond engineer, the Bakkers put out hours of the PTL Club, a chatty, homey, Christian-based talk show that included music and testimony and was, like all things Bakker, flown by the seat of its pants. The Bakkers knew that the acronym PTL would speak volumes to the deeply committed. It stood for Praise the Lord. But to be more welcoming to the non-believer, they would often remark how it stood for People That Love, a non-threatening religious message to those who weren't quite on board yet. In the early 1970s, new cable networks started up, but were in serious need of content. Everyone scrambled, sometimes using content produced by others until someone caught wind of it and stopped them. The same was true of any Christian broadcasting efforts out in the ether, with Bakker nabbing his old show tapes from his Pat Robertson days until Robertson decided to stop him by burning all the tapes of the Jim and Tammy Faye show done on his dime. Not terribly charitable, but I digress. As more and more stations opened up, there was plenty of time to put PTL segments into time slots on various networks, sometimes in the odd hours of the morning and late at night. Jim's absolute consummate skill was still on-air fundraising. But Furr eventually flew there as Bakker, ever the micromanager, and Tammy Faye, ever the prima donna, ran afoul of the Crouches. The Bakkers headed east again, this time to Charlotte, North Carolina, where they set up shop, calling their network PTL, and their sole mission to bring others to the Lord. They worked out of the back of a furniture store, hour after hour after hour, filling the time with their special combination of trials, tribulations, counseling, preaching, prayer, and silliness. Jim later told a reporter from Spy magazine, a magazine that sort of defined the 80s, quote, "It's not listed in the Bible, but my spiritual gift, my specific calling from God, is to be a television talk show host," end quote. He was the second Christian broadcaster to establish his own satellite network. Grandiose visions blossomed in Jim's brain.
From this moment on, the PTL Television Network plans to broadcast television and radio non-stop, 24 hours a day until the second coming of Jesus Christ.
He even offered airtime to other evangelists wanting to get in on the TV audience popularity. Whatever it was working. Bakker bought a 25-acre mansion in Fort Mill, South Carolina, as well as an adjoining lot to start his physical empire, which he called Heritage USA. In late 1975, he started building a 54,000-square-foot TV studio. The mansion cost just $200,000. The studio was budgeted to be built for $3 million. Now, the Bakkers didn't have that outright, but they figured, build it and God will show up with the cash. That was the plan, the whole plan. That Bakker's infinite faith would make money fall into his coffers like rain, that if you knew how to ask, God or the heavens or the weathermen would deliver. By early 1976, the network, such as it was, had 60 or 70 employees, all bent on their mission, most completely oblivious to the fiscal magic Bakker counted on. It was his own private prosperity gospel, which he soon began to sell to everyone else. A gospel that equated faith with financial and material success. Author Wigger tells the story of what happened during a December 1978 telethon when Jim told his audience that many of them had never given because they didn't really trust God. He said if they did give, God would respond 100-fold in the world and eternal life in the world to come. If any of you are Bible literate, you must be thinking, wait just a gosh dang minute. What about the whole parable that has Jesus explaining to a young ruler that he must give all his possessions to the poor to follow him, and that alone will bring eternal life? Bakker addressed this. He reinterpreted that parable to mean that Jesus was just testing the prince. Jesus wasn't being literal. He was just seeing what the young man would do if asked. Apparently, this sleight of hand worked for those who responded by writing checks, and for the Bakkers, who must have assumed that meant not only did Jesus approve of what they were doing, but didn't care if you did the math. Soon PTL employed 700 people, had affiliate stations, worldwide ministries, and, thanks to Please for it, cash. For the Bakkers, it was proof of their faith. But a lot of what Bakker promised, and acted as if he had accomplished, had not been funded because the money was never allocated as such. Sometimes people would ask about the promises made that went unfulfilled, but it seemed no one in the organization could keep Jim honest or accountable. He repeatedly said he had a huge PTL operation funding multiple missions in Korea. Manzano again.
Eventually it became embarrassing because people, Americans in particular, started going to Korea looking for the PTL studios, and of course they weren't there because we never gave them any equipment or gave them a nickel to buy equipment.
The Bakkers just kept shoveling giddy Christianity and, let's face it, lies. What was the attraction for Americans who could stay home all day and watch TV? In a 2021 piece on biography.com, writer Colin Bertram explained, quote, Tammy Faye's effusiveness and Jim's calm faith were endearing, as was her unpredictability, which could result in tearful outbursts about life's struggles and successes, her own included. Reverend Mel White, a ghostwriter for Jerry Falwell, described her appeal as combination Martha Stewart, Dr. Joyce Brothers, and Carol Burnett, end quote. White said, quote, she talked about sex and flirted with Jimmy. She took on the caricature of the obedient wife and blasted it. You have never seen Pat Robertson's wife or Jerry Falwell's wife. They stay at home doing what those wives do, end quote. People ate it up. Jim figured he was being told by the Lord to get even bigger. By offering programming in the morning hours to network affiliates across the country, Jim and Tammy Faye were in 600 markets, and not just in the Bible Belt. The better to broadcast not just their message of eternal life, but the message that Christian broadcasting needed constant dollars to keep afloat. That was done mostly through telethons or by encouraging partnerships that required pledges of regular donations. The work of PTL was never done.
I believe God has established this network as a base to reach the world. I believe every penny that comes in over and above the actual minimum cost to keep us on the air and the budget needs to go to world evangelism and world missions.
Jim Bakker was an impetuous man, often announcing on air a new proposal he had vetted with no one on his team before he unveiled it in public. He had a few advisors in his life that tried to curb his special brand of enthusiasm and fiscal mysticism, but Bakker tended to fire those who stood in his merry way. This meant that PTL always needed more money. Television was never a cheap medium. It cost something in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $15,000 per station per month. Now, in an era where satellite television burgeoned, Jim Bakker got his own contract to purchase a satellite grounding station in 1978. That meant he could broadcast 24 hours a day. Wigger reports that the uplink costs were about $50,000 a month. Stations were being added on a regular basis. So, too, the telethons needed to support them. His tried and true method of kiting checks that the Lord would cover seemed to be working. There are more than a few stories of how the Bakkers would be in need of funds, and lo and behold, a weak fundraiser would revive itself and, just like a slot machine, issue just enough cash to cover the shortfall. So I shan't be looked at as unfair in my dealings with the Bakkers. I should say there was much to admire, especially given that they were working out of the southern end of the Bible Belt in the 1970s. They openly and warmly welcomed Black religious leaders and Black audiences into the fold and gave women a fairly equal footing in front of the camera. They talked about sex. A frequent guest was hustler, publisher, and born-again Christian Larry Flint. and weight struggles and complicated relationships alongside the familiar Phil Donahue and a decade before Oprah. The Bakkers, on paper, took a very low salary. In 1977, Jim was making $23,740. Tammy Faye got around $5,000, and together they had a housing allowance of $260 a month. As entertainment, they were, admittedly, an acquired taste, but they repeatedly said they drew something like 20 million viewers a day. Up to now, the PTL ministry was solvent, but things were about to get out of hand as Bakker, now a father of two and husband to a frustrated and now neglected wife, and a recognized leader in both TV and American evangelism, thought he had the biggest idea since the dawn of Christianity. He was going to build a Christian utopia that everyone could come to on vacation, something to rival what Walt Disney had envisioned and built amid the swamps of Orlando. Now, Disney hadn't had to ask for money to build his world. No problem. If there was one thing Jim Bakker knew, it was how to get cash. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Uncommon Goods. Spark something uncommon this holiday season with incredible hand-picked gifts from Uncommon Goods. Can you believe it's the holiday season already? Uncommon Goods makes your holiday shopping stress-free by scouring the globe to find original, handmade, and seriously remarkable things for everyone on your gift list. Whether you're shopping for your Secret Santa or your entire family, Uncommon Goods knows exactly what they want. I love the stuff I found at Uncommon Goods. They've got the cutest outdoor decorations, which is kind of my thing right now. I ordered a wind chime that looks like an owl. Uncommon Goods looks for products that are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the US. They have these meaningful, out-of-the-ordinary gifts that feel personalized. Plus, some of them you can actually personalize. My favorite part, though, is that when you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're supporting artists and small independent businesses. Many of their handcrafted products are made in small batches, so shop now before they sell out for the season. Plus, with every purchase you make at Uncommon Goods, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They've donated more than $3 million to date. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/COTC. That's uncommongoods.com/COTC for 15% off. Don't miss this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods. We're all out of the ordinary. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Wild Grain. It is almost holiday time, and I never would have predicted this when I was a kid, but I actually host for my family, where I make them meals and stuff. And I look pretty confident doing it thanks to Wild Grain. I mean, really, the only one who knows my secret is Maddie, my sister, who's editing this ad right now. Hey, Maddie, don't tell Dad. Wild Grain is the first bake-from-frozen subscription box for artisanal breads, pastries, and pastas. The boxes are fully customizable to your tastes and dietary restrictions. In addition to their classic variety box, they have gluten-free boxes and plant-based boxes. And best of all, they take the hassle out of baking since all the items bake from frozen in 25 minutes or less with no mess or cleanup. I really like Wild Grain. When I'm hosting, I like to order some pasta. It's a great way to feed a lot of people an amazing meal. Impress your guests with minimal effort this holiday season. Wild Grain is offering our listeners $30 off the first box, plus a free item in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/COTC. You heard me. You can get $30 off your first customized box when you go to wildgrain.com/COTC, or you can use promo code COTC at checkout. The problem for those who tried to help Jim Bakker is they simply couldn't slow him down. He wanted his Heritage USA vacation haven to open as quickly as was humanly possible. He would need a $50 million loan in 1977 money. Today, that's just around $250 million ask. Hard to get for most anybody, and Bakker was no exception. And yet, construction began and continued as if the loan had gone through. Soon enough, workers were not getting paid, and PTL had to let go of some employees because it couldn't meet payroll. That's when Jim decided he needed a $30,000 boat. So he took the down payment of $6,000 out of general funds, and, no surprise, the press got tipped that things were not heavenly over there at the compound. Reporters Alan Cohen and Fire Gaylord of the Charlotte Observer began to dig in, writing about the financial problems and internal turmoil brewing within PTL, sharing that the ministry now owed $4 million to local contractors. The Charlotte News, a competitor, picked up the story as well. PTL was, after all, one of the region's largest employers. By November of that year, a wealthy parishioner had gifted the Bakkers a 4,500 square foot home worth almost $200,000. PTL's debt was now $6 million. Memos to Jim firmly asserting the danger he was in got little notice. Jim was too fixated on his plans to open Fort Heritage, his campground that was still without electricity, and his Heritage University, along with his Heritage Primary School, both in temporary buildings, in hopes of quick accreditation, which would never come. By January 1978, PTL's doings were being labeled fraudulent by the media. Everything from the audience numbers to the outstanding debt to the amount that the Bakkers were taking from the till. Then it got worse. That money donated for missions was going into defraying construction costs. The FCC began an investigation that labored on for years and never quite got anywhere, though it's still not clear to this day why. In the meantime, Heritage USA opened. It employed 2,500 people, and it reported an annual visitor total of 5 million. Following Disney's lead, it had a main street, a village church, a shopping area, the campground, skating rink, TV studios, and some recreational facilities. All run tax-free because, religious things were done there. Back on the home front, Tammy Faye was admittedly not happy about having been left behind in her husband's quest for glory. She was home with the kids and made noises that she was about to leave Jim. Others arranged for them to get Christian counseling in Palmdale, California. Tammy Faye had no choice and resented the intrusion by others into her marriage. Jim's people and the quote-unquote impartial counselors she was sent to all agreed that she had had an affair with Gary Paxton, a former Christian rock and roller who was trying to help Tammy Faye be the Christian Dolly Parton. It was most likely untrue, but Jim's dutiful minions lined up to back their horse and to provide him with some diversion. In 1980, John Wesley Fletcher, an ostentatious, overly flamboyant preacher who had become friends with Jim Bakker, arranged for him to have some time in a Clearwater Beach, Florida hotel room with a 20-year-old church secretary from Long Island he knew named Jessica Hahn. She would later tell both Playboy and Penthouse magazines how things went from there. Versions vary, of course, on even the smallest matters, like how long the encounter lasted. She would say it was an hour, but then change that to 15 to 20 minutes. She would say that the wine she was given made her dizzy. Fletcher and Bakker would contend there was no wine offered. She said that at one point, Bakker told her that he wouldn't be able to go on without her help. Bakker would say he did it to make Tammy Faye jealous. Hahn said she did not agree to any of it, that she was a virgin up until then and she was manipulated into it. She told interviewer Steve Grillo of a show called Aftershock,
"Yeah, he didn't know me. He just knew of me. And I was quite, vulnerable and innocent. I just didn't know any better. And I thought, wow, he's my idol. And, it was like I didn't understand what was happening. And then I thought, well, this man knows God way better than me. And I feel like maybe I'm helping him. And he said something to me. He goes, when you help the sheep, you're helping the shepherd. And I thought, wow, I can actually help people.
She later told the women of The View that she found it difficult to call it rape, but she does not remember ever saying yes. Small point here. A few in her hometown of Massapequa more than called into question the virgin part of her story, telling UPI in 1987 that she had done sex work in 1977 and 1978. I don't know, and I don't care. If she didn't say yes, she said no. For now, though, in 1980, she said nothing. And despite all signs that PTL was about to be eaten alive by debt, it kept going. It expanded abroad, it built its own church, it doubled donations. Books by both Bakkers on how to live a God-centered life continued to roll off the presses, and the ship sailed on somehow. Tammy Faye, who had but been abandoned to trad wife status, was back on the air. The ministry had bought the Bakkers a new $350,000 home, which they would enhance to be 10,000 square feet of living space. Everyone had a laugh about Tammy Faye's love of shopping and her ever-growing need for more closet space. To all outward appearances, it was good to be Jim and Tammy Faye again. In August 1983, the ministry announced it would expand to include a nationwide network of Christian therapy units in America's hospitals, nursing homes, and churches, all working out of a home base of a real hospital, nursing home, residential care, emergency services, and mental health facility that would be, as Palmdale Doc Fred Gross explained, quote, the dawning of a new age in total Christian treatment, end quote. Bakker had already built a home for unwed mothers. But sometime in 1984, Jessica Hahn's name came up in evangelical circles. A number of Assembly of God preachers had confessed to having illicit relations with her. She even began a 6-year-long affair with her hometown pastor, Gene Profeta. It wasn't long before Richard Dorst, a small-time televangelist who hitched his wagon to Bakker and was now a vice president at PTL, was called by Profeta and told that Hahn needed money to stay quiet about what had happened in that hotel room. Dortch later recounted that he told Bakker, "Oh, by the way, I've been dealing with a woman who says you raped her." Bakker asked a few questions and then said, "I didn't rape her, but there is a problem." Eventually, Hahn was handed $265,000 to stay mum, some of that in a trust. The money, it was later determined, had not come from the Bakker family accounts, as many presumed. It had come out of PTL funds, donated money, in other words, donated for the good works the ministry was doing. Now, ironically enough, Jim launched the building of his Total Learning Center, a place that was run by the very therapist who had done the couple counseling for the Bakkers in Palmdale. The offerings there were to be ambitious, covering every imaginable trauma, every imaginable relationship, and all manner of personal growth. What a lovely accompaniment that would be to the water and theme park he was expanding in South Carolina. The plan was shaping up nicely as a reimagining of those revivalistic camp meetings of yore, where people who didn't have a lot of entertainment options chose a communal worship tailgate party in a non-smoking, non-drinking environment for a good time. It was as if Jim was playing a game with himself called, "Can you top this?" He was just full of ideas to make the whole kit and caboodle into the perfect Christian, all-inclusive life buffet right there in Fort Mill, just an hour or so outside of Charlotte. Money was always on the table for discussion, of course. Bakker, as always, assured listeners that God would repay them up to 100% for their donations, guaranteed. But he wasn't sure that even he could rally the troops to ante up enough to make all this happen. What he needed was a new plan. It came to him after Bakker studied America's most visited playgrounds like Disney World or the St. Louis Zoo. He decided he needed a train that took you around the planned for, but not yet built, Heritage USA Park/Conference Center. Estimated cost, $133,000. Then and there, he told his TV audience that if they would give $1,000, they'd own the train and, as such, would never be charged for its use. It worked. All 133 slots were paid up. But Bakker figured he'd just keep raising money by offering even more shares in the railroad. Who would be the wiser? Such a good idea, he expanded it to those who wanted to purchase lodging in the planned but as yet unfunded capital project, the $25 million Heritage Grand Hotel, the ultimate hotel room stay for your Bible study/workshop/seminar/playground vacation there in Fort Mill. If you bought a partnership, you'd be entitled to 4 days and 3 nights of free lodging every year, Bakker told his audience. He just needed 25,000 lifetime partnerships to cover the cost. Voila! Build it, and they will come. Now is when it starts to really get hinky. Because of some wackadoodle accounting that did not adequately reflect the truth, Bakker was perfecting the high art of the con. The truth about the ministry's finances was such that in 1983, every month was showing a shortfall of around $1 to $2 million. As an example, November donations amounted to $4.7 million against $6.8 million outlay. Another way of doing the accounting was a tad less devastating. If you did the math on the assets versus liabilities, assets being things you can liquidate for cash, the shortfall was about $785,000 a month. But that did not account for the fact that bills to the many affiliate stations were more than 90 days past due. There was debt left on projects, like the Home for Unwed Mothers, that hadn't been completed. There were cost overruns on everything. Things were dire. Or whatever is worse than dire. It's hard to know exactly how much the Bakkers knew about the state of the enterprise they had created, but someone, somewhere, decided that the Bakkers needed to sell the living daylights out of the hotel partnerships. For those less able to handle the $1,000 ask, they offered some pricey Jesus sculptures, easily valued, they said, at $1,000. If you kicked in just $125, the sculptures were worth maybe $10. By the way, for those who didn't go to law school, this is where the mail fraud charges come to bear. But a problem arose with Bakker's ad hoc idea. People weren't just donating money to the ministry now. They were funding specific projects that held out specific benefits to the donor. At the end of the 1984 fiscal year, assets equaled $8.6 million, and liabilities totaled $28.5 million. Bakker's genius plan to dig them all out? Launch another project, a second hotel. Call it the Grand Tower. The legal eagles at PTL somehow managed to explain to Bakker that it was perfectly fine to raise money for one thing and use it for another. A lot of this was the work of Dortch, who was loyal to Bakker to the point that he bred widespread distrust, creating an even more secretive atmosphere that started to really rankle those who believed the entire ministry was now dangerously off mission. Did anyone even remember what the point of the enterprise had been? Oh, right, to spread the gospel. The Bakkers chose to spread themselves around instead, buying additional homes in Palm Springs, California, and in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. At the end of 1986, the PTL debt could only be papered over with that still desired loan of $50 million. Yeah, said Bakker, who decided instead to initiate the new year of 1987 with a plan to build a 1.25 million square foot Crystal Palace Ministry Center, something he deemed his greatest achievement, an obsession that he, quote, would build or die trying, end quote. Days later, among all the self-congratulation and excitement at the new venture, Dortch asked Bakker on air to name his favorite animal. Bakker said giraffe. And 2 giraffes appeared on stage as Dortch gifted them to Bakker as a way to start the Heritage Zoo. As if I need to tell you this, things were way out of control now. It's like a rampant disease had overtaken a whole zip code, and the only way to stop it was to ask God to send down one of his Old Testament plagues upon them. Well, he sort of did. First, rumors started that Tammy Faye had died. She hadn't. Or that she was a drug addict. She was. Or that a Bakker divorce was imminent. Who knows? That rival televangelist, Reverend Jimmy Swaggart or Reverend Jerry Falwell, or both, were planning some kind of takeover of the PTL enterprise. That Charles Shepard, a young Harvard-educated Charlotte Observer reporter, had put on the tall boots necessary to wade into the bullshit and turned out to be pretty handy with his shovel. That his first story was almost ready to go. It was to explain where PTL got the money to pay off Jessica Hahn. Crimes This Centuries is sponsored by Miracle Made. I'm sleeping on a new set of Miracle Made sheets right now, and they're not just pretty, they're super duper comfortable. Plus, they make me feel less gross. Because, as much as we don't like talking about this stuff, the fact is that traditional bed sheets can harbor more bacteria than a toilet seat, but Miracle Made offers a whole line of self-cleaning antibacterial bedding that prevents up to 99.7% of bacteria growth and requires up to 3 times less laundering. But here's what I love most about them. They have temperature-regulating properties for better quality sleep. I haven't woken up drenched in my own sweat in months when that had been a regular occurrence before. Go to trymiracle.com/COTC to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you are buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo code COTC at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/COTC and use the code COTC to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/COTC to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. In a world that thrives on competition, it might seem odd that both Jerry Falwell and Jimmy Swaggart enter the picture, ostensibly to save Jimmy Bakker. Swaggart was definitely not a fan.
There is nothing in the Bible about amusement parks, about entertainment. The gospel of Jesus Christ is not entertainment. The gospel of Jesus Christ is not amusement parks. It's a very serious, sobering business that the Lord Jesus Christ came from heaven and died on Calvary's cross for the sins of man. And it has no place for amusement parks in it, to be frank and plain with you.
Both would pretty quickly have sex scandals of their own, but for now, they made it clear they knew about and disapproved of Jessica Hahn. The only one who didn't know, apparently, was Tammy Faye. Time was up. Time to tell her and Charlie Shepard, who had requested an interview before the piece was to run, what would happen next. On the afternoon of March 19th, 1987, a lot of interested parties at the Charlotte Observer waited for Bakker to call. His minions did, then turned the phone over to Jim, who admitted guilt but blamed others for all of the mess. Said he had succumbed to extortion, said he was resigning, said he was appalled at the effort to defame and debase him, said he'd been hounded for a dozen years by the vengeful Observer, said that Falwell was taking over and not a stinking lick of it was his fault. End of statement.
Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker and the continuing saga of the PTL Club have taken on the irresistible dimensions of a national soap opera.
Virtually every newspaper in America and some in other countries carried the story. TV talk shows glommed on. Nightline and Larry King played it straight, but late-night TV made Bakker the butt of 1,000 jokes. Jessica Hahn was often written off as the whore of West Babylon. But there was more. The Charlotte Observer had the goods now, and on April 18th reported that in 1986, Jim and Tammy Faye had been paid $1.6 million. They had also, between January 1984 and March 1987, been paid $4.8 million in salary and bonuses. The paper then explained how Bakker's compadres and obsequious underlings had also drawn outrageous salaries, bonuses, perks, paid off credit card bills, and bought themselves pricey black Jaguars with donor money. Then came on-air allegations that Bakker liked men, sex workers, and wife-swapping, which went nowhere. Televangelism took a hit, with believers thinking maybe there was a better use of their money. Here's Jerry Falwell.
He needs to come clean about Jessica Hahn and repent. He needs to acknowledge these homosexual problems dating back from 1956 to the present time as they've been alleged to us. And he needs to return the millions of dollars.
Then, a mini-scandal hidden inside the scandal was uncovered by PBS's Frontline. Judy Woodward reported in 1988,
a federal grand jury is now investigating the Bakkers and other top PTL officials on possible charges of tax evasion and fraud. The IRS now claims the Bakkers received $10 million in excessive compensation, and that PTL owes the government over $55 million in back taxes. These now very visible government investigations surfaced only after the Jessica Hahn scandal forced Bakker to leave PTL last spring. But a new Frontline investigation has uncovered a substantial body of evidence that shows the federal government knew what was happening inside PTL as early as 1979, and for 8 years failed to take action to stop the excesses of PTL and the Bakkers.
After a 16-month federal grand jury investigation, Jim Bakker and a few of his top men at PTL were indicted in late 1988 with mail and wire fraud and conspiracy to do the same. The only real defense they all gave was that those who gave to PTL gave to the church, and they, as donors, never expected an accounting of exactly where the money was going. Bakker's cohorts insisted he knew everything. Tammy Faye seems to have escaped much notice. Bakker was given 45 years in federal prison and ordered to pay a fine of $500,000 by a very outraged federal judge. Excessive? Maybe. Tricky? I'm guessing so. As Wigger explained in his book, quote, none of the lifetime partners lost their life savings or had to dramatically alter their lifestyle as a result of the PTL collapse. None could remember the exact limits that Bakker set on the number of partnerships. All who had visited Heritage USA enjoyed it, and most absolutely loved the place, end quote. But it was largely abandoned by the faithful who had been conned. On August 30th, 1989, Jim Bakker's trial was temporarily suspended while he had a mental breakdown after having had hallucinations that animals were trying to harm him and being found inconsolable under his attorney's couch. A week later, he was ruled sane, and the trial continued. 3 weeks later, Heritage USA, Bakkers' Utopia, was hit hard by Hurricane Hugo, a Category 5 storm, and closed shortly thereafter. In 1991, a federal appeals court wrote that the judge in the case had overstepped by calling Bakker, quote, a money-grubbing preacher, end quote. They reduced the sentence, and by early 1995, Jim Bakker, having served less than 5 years, was free and divorced. In 1996, his autobiography came out, titled I Was Wrong. Bakker asks himself, quote, how could I have taught and even written books on the subject of how to get rich when Jesus spoke so clearly about the dangers of earthly riches? End quote. Later, he would bemoan that he had embraced a Disneyland gospel. In 1998, the Charlotte Observer won the Pulitzer Prize for its continued reporting on the PTL scandal. Tammy Faye died in 2007. Her life is now a musical that has the backing of Elton John. It got good reviews when it opened in London, and it opened on Broadway on October 19th of this year. Jim now hosts The Jim Bakker Show from a studio in Branson, Missouri. The show focuses on the end times and the second coming of Christ while promoting emergency survival products. I could not make this up. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read John Wigger's PTL, The Rise and Fall of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker's Evangelical Empire. She watched various documentaries, newscasts, and far too many episodes of Jim and Tammy Faye during their glory days. And she marveled at the decade-plus of work done by the Charlotte Observer in the face of relentless criticism from the faithful. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/GrabBagCollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this case was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Scoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com. On Instagram, we're at centuriespod, and check out our Crimes of the Centuries podcast Facebook page.